Welcome to my review of Cop Out. This is a 2010 movie. It was directed and edited by Kevin Smith. Those two roles quite key to making a watchable movie. But most people didn't watch this movie. They watched the drama around it. Specifically, Kevin Smith and Bruce Willis, who had been getting on quite famously, if you believe Kevin Smith's stories in his own stand-up and podcasts and things like that, on the set of Die Hard 3, where they had decided that they definitely should make a movie together. And they're probably right, but not this one. The drama then unfolded on set that they've had some sort of public falling out. Well, certainly Kevin Smith did, and made numerous statements along the lines of, Bruce Willis ruined my movie. Bruce Willis, as a professional actor of some standing, generally held his counsel, offering only the occasional comment and usually fairly neutral. However, Cop Out the film is not especially well regarded. It has a 5.5 on IMDb, which is not great. However, the numbers on Rotten Tomatoes are arguably even worse, especially among critics, and only 18% of those consider this a good movie, and a mere 39% of the more forgiving audience. But for those of you actually interested in the movie, yes, I watched it. I watched it twice so that you don't have to, and you should be grateful for that, because this movie is shockingly bad. Really, really bad. If you can watch the first 5 minutes, then you probably will finish the whole movie. And if you can enjoy the first 5 minutes, you're a more forgiving man than I am. It's fairly obvious straight from the off that Bruce Willis, this is the very first time we see him in the film. This is the expression that he has. It's unchanged through most of the movie. It's pretty clear he doesn't want to be there, doesn't believe in the project, and would just like to take his paycheck and leave. Tracy Morgan, on the other hand, he gives his all, and I mean he gives it all. He just leaves every ounce of the screaming and shouting that he can muster on screen, and boy is it grating. Morgan and Willis are about to interrogate a suspect. This is how the film starts, and Morgan says, "So how are we going to do this?" And when Bruce Willis mentions how he thinks he can do it, Morgan then says, "What, you think you're in charge now? What, you just literally asked him?" So clearly the scriptwriters, a couple of dullards by the name of Rob and Mark Cullen, have no clue what they're doing. They have no interest in what they're writing. They're just bashing it out. However, to put the blame squarely on them, I think would be a little unfair, because clearly there's a lot of this movie where Kevin Smith has barely bothered to do any directing or any writing, and he's just said, improvise, guys, let's see what works. The problem with doing that is that if you're improvising on a comedy, then you need to remember that each joke needs a setup. But the other thing you need to remember is that this movie is a cop movie, therefore it has to have a degree of a plot, ideally one involving police. But it's not really about any sort of investigation. Yes, we're 5 minutes into this video and we're still on the first scene, but that's okay because the first scene lasts for about 15 minutes anyway, and basically, Tracy Morgan grabs hold of their suspect and screams a movie quote at him. And then Bruce Willis, in case you're wondering what movie the quote is from, he tells you. It's insufferably annoying, the whole scene. One of the movies, incidentally, that Tracy Morgan quotes is Die Hard. And when he says, "Yippee-ki-yay," Bruce Willis says, "I've never seen that movie," instead of telling you what movie it's from, just in case, it broke your suspension of disbelief that any of this nonsense could ever happen. And let's face it, it's a comedy, so you allow for a degree of nonsense. And at the end of that, if your spirit isn't broken, we discover that the suspect is a drug dealer and that he's dealing drugs out of his own mobile phone shop. So they decide to stake it out. And this gives further opportunity for Tracy Morgan to stand in the street and just scream things. But what happens while he's screaming is that their informant is dealing with the drug dealer inside the shop, and he's machine gunned. It's a real tonal switch and completely out of place. And I even think actually that this shot of him falling into the thing is probably just Kevin Smith doing a reference to another movie, oblivious to how dark it makes this scene. Then they give chase to the killer as he runs off, and we're treated for the first time to the wonderful score of this movie, which clearly borrows heavily from Beverly Hills Cop. But that's okay because it's composed by Harold Faltermeyer, who did the soundtrack to Beverly Hills Cop. But what he did in Beverly Hills Cop was he created a bunch of riffs and things like that stick in the mind, that are memorable and iconic. It's a little bit like John Williams with the Star Wars score, where like a carriage would have a theme, whereas here there's none of that. It's just vaguely reminiscent of the sort of noise that a Spectrum 128 would make back in the day. The end of this scene, where Tracy Morgan's done nothing of any use, but then Tracy Morgan cycles up, and clearly the scene has to end in a way. Now, normally you would linger on a line or a character, or you just get out of there quick, but because we're ad-libbing, we've got to have this moment where Tracy Morgan has his time to shine, to come up with something witty, and what he comes up with is, hold your aching sides. But it is a sign that nobody involved in this movie has any clue what they're doing at all. Naturally, having got their only lead and their informant murdered brutally, they're then suspended for 30 days without pay. But the suspension is not the point of this scene. The point of this scene is exposition. And, of course, ad-libbed banter, which is predictably painful. Bruce Willis is like, do you need me to beg? Which is the first time that anyone's really sort of acted. But the reason that Bruce Willis is really unhappy is that he has to pay for his daughter's wedding. So he's going to lose that 30 days, a month's pay. Then, of course, we have the other two cops, the ones that didn't get fired, that are angry that their case was busted. It's all movie cliches. They've been told, hey, just ad-lib, it'll be great, you're funny guys, like Kevin Pollak and some guy, I don't know this guy. One of them says, you ruined our case, you never scramble another cop's eggs. Which, of course, gives the other guy the opportunity to leap into action and say, you never poach a case, or something along those lines. Classic gag, running on the egg theme, because, we're ad-libbing, we're comedians in sync with each other. But no, this is what he says. It's incredibly witty, so I suggest you brace yourself. He says, ever. And that's because, when it comes to the ad-libbing in this film, I'm pretty sure that Kevin Pollak particularly was just like, fuck that. I'll just have the money, thanks. So then we cut to the bad guy. He's looking for a car. He really wants this car. And he says something about getting bank accounts that will give him an opportunity to expand his drug trade across all of New York. Apparently the car's been stolen. We cut to Bruce Willis meeting his daughter. Here we learn in a really subtle way, it only says like 4 times wedding expenses on this shot, that the wedding's going to cost $48,000. So now you can clearly understand why Bruce Willis is upset about having 30 days without pay, because that money he needed to pay for his daughter's wedding, clearly a month's pay to him must be at least $55,000, $7,000 to live off, $48,000 to pay for your daughter's wedding. And Jason Lee is now dating Bruce Willis's ex. He's clearly rich. He offers to pay. And this is played with like super serious music, like he's an absolute swine, like he's the evil one, not the drug dealers that we've just seen killing 2 people in a church, but Jason Lee is the evil one because he's offering to pay for his current wife's daughter's wedding, which I think would actually make him quite reasonable. From there, we need to know what's really important though, which is that Tracy Morgan is married to Rashida Jones. Tracy Morgan is the jealous type. He likes to phone her a lot and thinks that she's having an affair with the neighbour. But here comes the plot. The plot is that Bruce Willis is going to sell a really rare baseball card. I'm sorry, I know nothing about baseball, but it's called Somebody Pafko. And apparently it's a really rare baseball card. It could potentially go for $80,000. He wants to sell it to pay for the wedding and be the great dad that we all know he is, right? Meanwhile, Tracy Morgan decides that he's going to put a spy camera in his own bedroom so that he can catch his wife in the act of cheating on him. So they go to a baseball memorabilia shop to sell the card. And while Tracy Morgan is outside shouting and jumping around and just generally doing Tracy Morgan things, Bruce Willis goes inside. And it is at that moment that 2 guys come in and rob the shop, and they tase Bruce Willis. Then they discover he's a cop, so they tase him again. But Bruce Willis sees like a tattoo on the guy's arm, but he has now, of course, lost the card. The guys stole it along with everything else. They decide that they're going to look at all the robberies with a similar method in the local area. Tracy Morgan says, I called all the local tattoo parlours using the robberies as a radius. Forgive me, it's been a while since I did GCSE maths, but that's not how radiuses work. But the guy in the tattoo parlour says that the guy they're looking for owes him money and has told him that he'll give him the money after he's robbed a specific address that night, which seems like something a burglar probably wouldn't mention. However, they then decide to case out the house and they see the robber jump over a balcony that he could very easily step over, and Tracy Morgan goes, that's parkour. He then explains what parkour is for the audience that are unaware, and Bruce Willis, spotting the exposition and trying to hide the fact that it's obvious exposition, says, "What are you, Wikipedia?" Your exposition, by the way, if you're a screenwriter, is still exposition. It doesn't matter what you do if you're just literally explaining something like that. And then we have two people turn up and they're ad-libbing a conversation. And one of them's this lady, who I'm pretty sure is from Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I don't know who the young lad is, but they're talking about stuff that they're ad-libbing. They're completely out of sync with each other, have no sort of common ground. It's just all really awkward and not funny and painful. But apparently he likes computer games, so he says, "All your base belong to us," which he's probably about 30 years too young to have experienced for real. So it is quite reasonable that she would have no idea what to do. But the police go into the house and they find that the burglar is none other than Sean William Scott, who at this point in his career had no career, but he's not the worst thing about this movie. But again, they're ad-libbing, and this is the first instance that you think maybe there is actually two people that can riff together just a little bit, and it is surprisingly Tracy Morgan and Sean William Scott, because Sean William Scott has a gun pointed at him and he's like rubbing his nipple basically, and Tracy Morgan's like, "Shoot him, he's rubbing my nipple," and Sean William Scott replies, "It's just nervous energy," which would work really well if it didn't have this line from Bruce Willis in the middle of it. Remember your joke, right? But this is why it's not just the director or the writer that's ruining this movie. It is actually the editor as well, because an editor worth of souls would have just cut that. We cut to another scene in which the bad guys are talking about looking for their car again, and then back to Sean William Scott, who's now in the back of the police car as they're driving him to jail. There's no need for this scene to exist, and it lasts at least about 5 minutes, and 1 minute of that, an entire minute, is dedicated to telling a knock-knock joke. But it's just a painful moment, and you can literally see Bruce Willis dying inside. But we learn that Sean William Scott sold the baseball card to a drug dealer, the bad guy, the guy that's looking for the car. So now the two things are put together as starting to be a plot that makes sense, despite the better efforts of everyone involved in telling the story. So they go to the drug dealer's house, and he explains that he will trade the baseball card that he's just bought for the car being found by the police, which, let's face it, he says it's the police's job to locate a stolen car, right? So they've decided to case some cars because they think that the most prolific car thief in the city is going to rob the cars. They do. They bust that guy, and he says to them that he did not steal that car, but he does know who's got it now. So the police then go to that guy, and instead of going, "Oh, by the way, that car you bought is stolen, you're in big trouble now, you're going to have to help us out a little bit," they stage this thing where Bruce Willis is playing a murderer and Tracy Morgan comes in and he's doing like an impression of RoboCop. But the first thing that you note about Tracy Morgan's RoboCop impression is it's pretty obvious he's never seen RoboCop. However, they then notice when they stop that there's a noise coming from the car, and they open the trunk, and lo and behold, there's a person in it. And they take her, because she only seems to speak Spanish, to a Spanish restaurant where there's the guy there's going to translate what she says for them. And they have 2 takes of Tracy Morgan eating crisps and getting this look from Bruce Willis, which you wonder if it was intended to be 2 takes of the same thing, and they just thought it was so hilarious that they would use it twice, or the editor was trying to fix something truly horrible that was ad-libbed and he needed to cut out. Tracy Morgan runs into his own house to get his camera, but I'm pretty sure that this scene, when it was filmed, would have been the scene at which Bruce Willis was just like, "Do you know what? I'm done here. I'm just done with this. This is just painful," because Tracy Morgan comes back with the camera and doesn't want to watch it. And Bruce Willis is like, "I'm not watching that. I don't want to see what's on that." Tracy Morgan insists, and he insists by doing the please impression of Lulu from Fifth Element. And you can literally tell again that not only has Tracy Morgan not seen Fifth Element, but you can also see that Kevin Smith doesn't know how to get him to rein it in just enough to actually do that Lulu impression. Sometimes, you go, "Oh, I'm going to be in a cop film, I'm going to go and do my research." But the research you should be doing is not any of that. You should just go away and watch sci-fi and geek movies, the ones that Kevin Smith is ripping off. Then you would know how to do the impressions. But the police, the ones that are still working, or at least still working properly, they find a gun on one of the dead drug dealers, and they discover that it's in fact Tracy Morgan's gun. So now they're completely convinced that Tracy Morgan is a crooked cop. So they phone up Bruce Willis, who's in a safe house with a Spanish lady. He then decides to go and meet these two cops. And you end up wondering if it was the first scene that they shot, because Bruce Willis is like doing Bruce Willis stuff, like from when Bruce Willis was a really charming and brilliant leading man of top draw movies. Is completely out of place in this film. This film wants to be Beverly Hills Cop, to the extent that they've paid for the same composer, basically dragged him out of his retirement home to make the worst movie score you will ever hear. And if it's not Beverly Hills Cop, it wants to be Lethal Weapon, because both of those films were good cop films with an element of comedy, but this is a terrible cop film with painful attempts at comedy. And the way that you can tell that the guys making this film do not know what they're doing is ask the question, what were the side plots of Lethal Weapon? Because there really wasn't one. It was about drug smuggling and investigating. But this is not about anything. It's about Bruce Willis wants his baseball card so that he can pay for his wedding, and Bruce Willis clearly doesn't give a fuck about any of that. And Tracy Morgan believes that his wife is cheating on him, but it doesn't go anywhere. But all of these things are distracting from the actual plot, because Kevin Smith can't write that movie, nor can he direct that movie. So he's got to have different stuff in his movie to make it look like it's about those things, but it's not. It's not a cop film. The cop film is tacked on to soap opera bullshit, and Kevin Smith can't write or direct that either. But poor man's Penelope Cruz says hi a lot, and then she escapes because she thinks that the guys are going to get killed because they're trying to help her. And Tracy Morgan watches the footage on the camera and is convinced that his wife's having an affair. But this is such a cliche that I've not quite watched the footage through to see what it actually means. And it's been done so many times that it's just, at this point, it's so obvious that Kevin Smith has no clue what he's doing. He's just borrowing from a bunch of other movies and then pretending that he's doing it because he's like a geek, but he's not doing it for that reason. He's doing it to cover up the fact that he is incompetent. And what's truly terrifying at this point of the film is that I looked at the clock and discovered that there was still another 40 minutes of film left. They decide to bail out Sean William Scott, and they decide to bail him out so they can get him to rob the house where the baseball card is. Then they go to the house, and Sean William Scott, in the process of doing a little bit of parkour, which Bruce Willis calls his Parker because he can't even be bothered with that anymore, well, Sean William Scott slips and kills himself. And then Bruce Willis simply breaks into the house through the upstairs window himself. And you go, well, why did you need the cat burglar if you can just do it yourself anyway? He leans out of the house and goes, ta-da! And the other guy's like, you're shouting out, go and do this, go and do that. In the middle of broad daylight, in a house that you're breaking into, that is owned and operated by drug dealers, you're just shouting around in the street about what you've just done. The only thing funny about this film is just how incredibly incompetent everything about it is. But the bad guys have now recaptured Discount Penelope Cruz. We never saw that happening, but what we do see is that she's now ad-libbing and she doesn't know how to do it. She just shouts a bunch of obscenities and then complains about being locked in the car for 2 days, but they're about to kill you. They're going to torture you and kill you. Surely that's more important. You've got something else to worry about right now. This is what happens when you get people that aren't funny and aren't on the same wavelength as each other. And how could you be on the same wavelength as Kevin Smith unless you were absolutely baked out of your skull? So it's just not ever going to work. And when they stick like duct tape over her mouth, it's actually a relief. But the problem is that he's still asking her questions about where the car is. How is she supposed to answer you? But to be fair, that this guy, the bad guy, he seems to be quite enjoying himself. He's the only one that actually is. He's actually quite watchable. Where everybody else in this movie is either going through the motions, hating every minute of being on set, or just utterly incompetent. But this guy's all right. The other police decide, you know, we have no evidence against this guy. Why don't we go to this house where the drug dealer lived and see what's going on there? They're about to get killed. Bruce Willis and Tracy Morgan save them by doing a bit of shooting, which includes the worst sound effect you'll ever hear in an actual movie. It's worth watching the film just to go, oh, wow, what is that? Like a paintball gun firing? It's really bad. we've got to have some more ad-libbing, right? So they're going, oh, we'd better call this in. Somebody needs to call this in, right? But, oh, no, the car's over there. How are we going to get it? Well, he's going to have to run across the road under fire and then leap across like a hero, and they're going to have to do covering fire and stuff like that. This is a cop movie. We're doing cop things. But in the fuss and fighting, what they've forgotten is that they both actually have a mobile phone and were talking to each other on it less than about 3 minutes of screen time ago. In the fuss, Tracy Morgan has shot the bad guy right through the middle of Bruce Willis's baseball card, which was in his shirt pocket. So now Bruce Willis can't pay for his wedding, which means, unfortunately, this movie's still going on. And at this point, it's outstayed its welcome by an hour and a half, and it's just about approaching the 90-minute mark. We'd go to the wedding, which is shit and awful, and Rashida Jones I told you I wasn't cheating on you, it was all, my gay cousin staged it to make you look like a fool. This movie is, in fact, just a giant waste of money, and that's pretty obvious from the fact that they actually hired a hairdresser for Bruce Willis, and had on set a technical advisor from the police. What was he doing? What was he doing? There's no policing in this. Not anything that's not borrowed from other cop movies. Kevin Smith will tell you that Tracy Morgan was an absolute star, just a legend on set, and he says that because he enjoyed the bits where he shouted out lines from films, because he was stoned at the time and he thought that everybody else would share that enthusiasm for it, but they won't, and they don't. For all the beef that Kevin Smith has come out with, all the stuff that he said about Bruce Willis ruined my movie, that is absolute bullshit. 2 people ruined this movie, the director and the editor, and both of them are Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith ruined this movie from the start. It was a lame duck. Bruce Willis knew that from about the 2nd or 3rd day on set, I would have thought, if not before he even turned up, when he looked at the script and went, what the actual fuck is this? You start to wonder if the reason that they're ad-libbing is because Kevin Smith can't write anymore. Because, he was involved in the geek culture, and you think that perhaps Clarks and things like that were, when he was still young, still into those things, and he's not into those things now, so he doesn't have anything that you would consider a real-world experience that he can write about. And it exposes Kevin Smith as a bit of a fraud, to be honest with you. He's gone from king of the geeks to being a fake geek. But Kevin Smith will blame everybody apart from him because he still wants to work. Well, good luck with that. How's your podcast going?